When you're 16, you believe that there's no hill you can't climb. Well, while doing just that, my next guest suffered a brain injury. She went from being the top of her class to hearing words like, "you'll never," and "can't," even being thrown out of school. But with the help of some key people and her own indomitable will, she went from "no, you can't" to "actually, I can." Welcome to Beyond the Lens, Stories That Unite Us, and my interview with Britini Hester. So, hi, Britini. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well.
Good.
So, walk us back and tell us what happened when you were 16.
So when I was 16, I was on a mission trip serving with my church, and we took a relaxation day and were rock climbing. And the person who was in charge of my ropes messed up. So I went swinging into the rock head first. And this isn't some like rock wall. It was rocks in the middle of the mountains. And dented the helmet. I blacked out for a few seconds and they pulled me down. Nothing really happened. They just kind of gave me half melted ice and said, like, go about your day. But over the next several days, I started realizing I was in significant pain. There were some other symptoms happening. And so when I finally got home from the trip, we noticed that like I was just completely off, and my mom immediately took me to an urgent care where there was an ER doctor on call, and was given the diagnosis of a brain injury. The doctor was really unaware of how I was still alive because he said I was supposed to have died within 4 to 6 hours. And so after that, it was just this long journey of trying to get to where I am now, and pushing through and seeing doctors pretty much daily. So 2011 is kind of when all of that started.
So, did they give you any indication of if you had had medical treatment right away, if you would have been better off?
They weren't really sure because we had waited so long. I think my first MRI was a week and a half to 2 weeks after the accident, so it was still kind of hard to see what had happened. That would have been one of the only things that would have really helped day one, is getting that MRI to see what damage had already not had it healed yet versus when I got it 2 weeks later. But all the doctors were just kind of stumped as to how I was even functioning. So I don't know that if I had gotten medical treatment day one, if that would have changed or not. So yeah, I don't know.
So then what did they do? What was your prognosis at that point?
At that point, it was, let's try to figure out how to manage the pain, because I was in such significant pain from the accident. They were still trying to figure out, like I said, I was supposed to have been dead. So at that point, they're like, how do we basically live with the consequence of living? Which I'm very thankful for. I'm still alive. But I had to go through a lot of doctor appointments every day and shots and different medical treatment regimens to try to numb the pain at least, because I was 16, and so you don't want to just stop life at that point. And so the first 6 months were really finding that treatment. So trying different combinations of medication, different levels. I was put on narcotics. I was put on a patch that administered narcotics into my system every hour. We tried one concoction of pills that basically put me to sleep for 18 hours to try to restart my brain. And that didn't work. And so we didn't really find a treatment that worked for about a year and a half.
They did some surgery on you along the way. Tell me about that.
So I've had a couple procedures. So a couple of them were epidural blood patches, where they basically take blood from your arm and inject it into your spinal column, because I had a spinal leak. So what that means is my brain was sitting on the base of my skull instead of floating in the fluid that it's supposed to be in. But before we figured out that there was a leak, surgeons and doctors in the hospital were telling my mom that they wanted to do exploratory spinal surgery on me to kind of figure out what was wrong, but that I was pretty much guaranteed to come out fully paralyzed from this. And I was 17, and so nobody wanted that. So we thankfully said no to that surgery, and my neurologist stepped in, and he did some other tests and ran other labs and whatnot and figured out that maybe this is not exploratory spinal surgery worthy. Let's figure out what the root cause is before we paralyze a 17-year-old kid. And so thankfully I was not paralyzed in the hospital, but had that been the case, it would have been, this just would have been a different story.
Yeah, much different.
Yeah.
Because you were a minor and the doctors communicated most of this with your mother,
Mm-hmm.
how much do you know about her response to all of this information and all of this situation?
I was shielded, I think, a lot from it. It wasn't until I was much older that we were able to fully discuss everything. But at the time, I did know there are things happening that I'm not aware of, just because I could see her crying in the hospital when she thought I was asleep, or doctors would pull her aside before they would talk to me. And then when they talked to me, they kind of dumbed everything down a little bit. And so she definitely got the worst news and the worst version of the news, but I was still aware that something is happening. And it's hard in that position because you're like, you're talking about me, you're doing exploring procedures that are going to happen to me, and I want to know about it, but you also don't want to scare the living daylights out of a kid. And so I think it was just this weird position to be in, because I was old enough to understand a lot of what was happening, but not fully.
Do you think because of your brain injury that you would have been able to really process the information?
No, because like I said, I had a really hard time connecting pieces together of certain things, and so I think it would have almost been disconnected for me of, okay, I understand that that's what might happen, but not to me. Like, I didn't understand that that was where I was.
So when you're on that level of narcotic, how does that affect your life?
I was kind of a walking vegetable at that point. Mentally, I was just not there a whole lot. I was kicked out of school for being on them, so they had to put me on home hospital. I had to stop taking a full load of classes at the time, and I was only in high school. I went from being top of my class on time to graduate in 3 years for high school to then being told I was never going to graduate. I lost a lot of friends just because I couldn't keep up relationships. I went from serving 6 days a week and being on leadership teams to being at home in the dark room. And then just the emotional toll all of that takes. So I went into a really big depression, started suffering from anxiety and post-traumatic stress. And so I just was not myself. And it took me a very long time, and I'm still getting to the point where I can be myself again.
So what were some of the things that helped you with your recovery? Walk us through some of that.
Yeah, I had a really good support system. I had parents who fought, a mom who fought for my medical treatment and finding the best doctors and trying so many different things and not willing to take no for an answer. So when we had a doctor say, you're not worth it because you just need to be in a dark room 24/7 and basically stop living. That wasn't good enough. And so she fought to find my now neurologist who has faith and hope in me, and is willing to put in the time and effort to find treatment that works. I also did still keep some of my friends who, even though they didn't understand what was happening, were willing to stick it out with me. And so a support system was really what drove me and encouraged me to keep fighting.
Or were there things that you had to relearn along the way?
I had to relearn a lot. So academically, even, like I said, I was way ahead of my grade level, to then after the injury, I was testing 11 years behind my grade level in certain areas. And so I really had to just learn how to learn in an academic sense. And then I just had to learn basic functioning skills. Like I could still talk and I can walk and all of that, but it was almost like a wire was off in my brain where I couldn't piece things together as easily, if that makes sense. And so I didn't understand that A had to do with B. And so I had to find that connection again. But the biggest struggle was academically.
Yeah, it must have been very difficult to go from where you were to way behind.
Yes.
So did you work through that alone? Did you have tutors? How did you cope with all that?
A lot of it was both. I did a lot of it alone. I had to find ways that worked for me. And just by trial and error of, for instance, if I had a vocab test, I needed to figure out how I could make those words stick in my head, because memory was hard for me. And so just trying different processes to figure that out. But I also had really great teachers once I got put in the classes I needed to be in. And
let me just ask you real quickly, how long did it take before you were allowed back in school to get to those teachers?
Not until college fully, but in my senior year in high school, I did a hybrid. I was on both home hospital and taking a class on campus, or 2 classes on campus. And so it was roughly a year and a half to 2 years before I could really have access to those teachers, and we had to fight to be put in the proper classes. And so, yeah, once I did get there, it was much easier, and those teachers are the ones who poured into me. For instance, my math teacher, he was tutoring me in math before he was my actual academic teacher. And then we asked for me to be placed in there because he understood me. He also is my home hospital teacher. And so he knows nothing of French, but because I was taking French, he was still seeing my academic progress in that, and he would have help teaching me. But he really saw my potential and didn't see the brain injury. And that was something that was huge. Instead of seeing me as the girl with the brain injury, he just saw me as the girl. And so, yeah. And then when I got to college, and we'll talk about how I got there, but I'm sure, but I had to, I still am considered special ed. And so I have an academic accommodations plan to help me in my courses, but I was still able to access the classes other people would be taking.
So you had a lot of support, the right support along the way, mm-hmm. between your mother and the teachers, and then once you found the right neurologist.
Yeah.
But I also know that you have a 4-legged one.
Yes.
Tell me about him.
So my senior year in college, I got a service dog, and I knew I had needed one since I was 16. But the program trained ones, which is pretty standard, are extremely expensive. They range from anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 for a service dog. And between medical bills and being in the doctor's every day, and I was still trying to reach college at that time, like it just wasn't feasible. And at the time we didn't know how to train one on our own. So I got put on a couple wait lists, but the wait lists are 3 years long. And then you just kind of don't hear back sometimes. And so that's what happened. So I just started to look into it more on how to train my own. Reached out to trainers, and one of my best friends is a professional trainer. And so I had that support. So senior year, I found Logan, and he came home, and he is now trained to alert to my migraines up to 30 minutes before they happen, so that I can just take onset medication and have it work so that I can continue to function. Because sometimes when I have migraines, I'm debilitated for weeks. He's also trained in just like emotional stuff. So working with the PTSD and doing grounding work. And if I, for whatever, start to dissociate, he'll pull me out of the room that I'm in and just kind of bring me back. He has a long list of other things that he does too, but those are his like two primary. The Migraine Alert has been probably one of the best things that I could have had trained in him, because it allows me to continue my independence and functioning.
And so how does he know that you have a migraine coming on? Does he sense behavioral changes in you? Does he sense chemical changes in you? What does he do?
So it's a little bit of both. So it's partially scent work. So like your hormones and chemicals in the body will change when you're in pain. And so he can pick that up. But also the behavioral piece is he picks up the micro expressions in people that human to human can't see. So before I start feeling the pain, I already am starting to express pain. So whether that be in my posture, my tone of voice, or like the way my face looks, you and I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell, but he can. So then he'll come up to me and alert that way as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you were told way back that you wouldn't even graduate high school. And so tell us about college, because I know that you went.
Yes. So I ended up graduating high school with honors, mind you. So I was very proud of that. I was able to keep that up. It took a lot of work, but college was always a dream of mine. I've always loved school. I've always been involved in academia. And I wasn't willing to give that up despite doctors and people telling me it wasn't possible anymore. And so I fought really hard to get there. Sorry, I'm going to get emotional. And applied to college. Kind of didn't doubt that I would get in, even though even my parents were like, well, just like pump the brakes a little bit. If you don't get in, it's okay. Like you can try again. I was like, I'm going. What are you talking about? And I ended up getting into a tier 1 university. And so I went. I graduated in 4 years and had really awesome professors who believed in me, but who also understood that I was a little bit different and needed a little bit of accommodation to get to where I'm at. So I graduated in 4 years with great grades, good GPA, and I'm actually currently in a master's program. So I'm working on graduating in June with my master's, and then hopefully actually starting a PhD in the fall.
Which is a far cry from not being able to graduate high school. You should be very proud of yourself.
Thank you, I am.
So what's your degree going to be in?
My current degree is going to be a Master's of Science in Research Psychology and Data Analysis. And then the PhD, there's a couple programs I'm looking at, but one is going to be a PhD in Social and Personality Psychology. And then the other is just an experimental psychology where I can kind of branch out into the social and personality, but also health psychology. My dream research would be on how interpersonal relationships affect chronic illness and chronic pain. So kind of everything that culminates into how I got to where I am, but in a research setting.
Very impressive.
Thank you.
So let me ask you Britini, if you had 5 minutes or so to go back and talk to the girl that started this journey, what would you tell her, knowing what you know now?
To just keep fighting, to not give up. There were a lot of times where giving up was going to be much easier than fighting. And now knowing where I'm at and the trajectory that I'm on over the next few years, I could have never dreamed that back then. I never thought I would be capable of getting a master's or continuing to have amazing friends around me because of what I had been told and where I had been in life. And so I would just sit her down and say, keep going. It's worth it. There's going to be days where it's hard and you're going to want to give up, but use those days to pour into other people because other people are in the same position. And really advocate for yourself and advocate for others who may not have a voice.
I think there's an old saying that is something along the lines of that the obstacles in front of us are no match for the power within us. And I think you are a perfect example of that.
Thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Britini, and I wish you the best.
Thank you. You too.
My job as a photographer is to see things in a different way, to create reactions, to frame what is seen so we can better understand. Here we take a look beyond the lens of what we may think we see or know about people, events, and situations. To subscribe, please join my mailing list, visit my YouTube channel, or look for Beyond the Lens on Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple. I'm honored by the people I work with. If you'd like to talk about shaping the way you are seen in photographs, please schedule a call. I'd love to hear from you.